All right, we're good to go. I'm gonna kick off like an introduction, and not necessarily an introduction, but I'm gonna cut all this part out. That way, um, you know, and we're gonna dive right in. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Today, I have the Turk, aka Jacob Turkelson, FPS accountant, handheld wizard, and hardware wizard. And we're going to jump into a bunch of numbers. I mean, you already see a spreadsheet on the screen. There's not really going to be much to deal with. But the question on Game Passes, revenue structure, project funding, and all is one that I strongly believe a lot of us who are interested need to dive into. So, the Turk,
Hey, what's up, man?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being willing to do this. And yeah, just kick it off once you're ready.
Yeah, so one thing that's just driven me nuts these past few, almost a week at this point, is just the lack of understanding how projects in a larger sense get funded and how those projects actually get broken down into cost segments. So I'm a hardware developer engineer, so I don't do any game development specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But once you're actually in the business and you understand how projects actually get funded, a lot of this knowledge just gets carried over. So what I've done is through the use of ChatGPT, I was able to go and through like a learning exercise to extract publicly known available data for various different games for both units sold, development costs, marketing budgets, and all of this stuff. And rather than filtering through Twitter and going through all these other individual data sources,
Mm-hmm.
I'm using AI to kind of do that job for me. And my goal here is not to say this specific game would have been profitable with or without Game Pass, but I want to kind of build this rubric or template that would kind of show why a game could be profitable with Game Pass, but also how Game Pass itself benefits from having this type of a structure. But I can also, and maybe we can back and forth a bit on this,
Mm-hmm.
is different games would benefit from it and some games wouldn't benefit from it. And I think that's why I follow your channel, having an open conversation, putting fanboyisms aside and like looking at just raw numbers
Mm-hmm.
helps give a picture of what this thing is we're arguing about really means. So that's my intent here. I'm hoping that your audience can appreciate a spreadsheet. Uh,
Oh, I
I
have,
don't.
my audience. I have people in my audience that make spreadsheets for me.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, this is right at home for a lot of the folk that watch the channel here. And I started out really casually talking about this stuff, and I realized that there are a lot of people who do this as their daily. I'm talking accountants, financial managers that are among us, or some that are even retired that did stuff like this in, during their careers. So this is the kind of stuff that, and gaming is great. We love to game, but again, many of us are super busy, and so this is how we kind of stay attached to gaming by proxy, in a sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is fun stuff. So what do you have for us, the Turk?
Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to hear and understand was just like, what does a budget for a game look like? Because at least in my industry, in my department, we get a bag of money handed to us saying, you've got Project X, Project Y, Project Z coming down the pipe. We've given you 10 people to work on that project. Here's a bag of money. Solve these projects without costing too much more additional money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I went to ChatGPT and was asking the basic question of, what does an average AAA game budget look like? And of course, I asked it to spit it out as a CSV, comma separated values file so that I could throw it into Excel and start doing some math.
Okay.
So basically, it breaks down into three different chunks. There's the development cost, which includes the core game development, tools and middleware licensing. I'm not going to read it out because your people watching can look at this.
Okay.
But then it also breaks down into the marketing and the operations costs with some really large numbers attached to it. As many people know, AAA games are getting more and more expensive, and it's really important to keep in mind some of these sub costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to go and host a bunch of content creators to come to an event, provide screen capturing material, pay for the people that are doing that, all of that costs money, right?
Yep.
But in the grand sense of things, when it comes to a budget for a game, it's like 2% of the overall budget. So putting all these numbers onto a page so people can look at it really helps people understand just the gravity of money that's required to produce a game. Of course, this is a AAA game. This isn't any specific game, but it
Mm-hmm.
is a reasonably, what did ChatGPT say? This has reasonable confidence of what a game cost structure would look like. Of
I see.
course, this is just a template, right? There
Mm-hmm.
could be games where they go and spend $80 million on marketing, and that balloons costs accordingly, right? But
Mm-hmm.
this is, again, I'm not trying to prove a specific game is profitable or not. I just want to show how Game Pass fits into the equation.
Got it.
So so that's where this chunk comes in. And Game Pass is literally just a bag of money being handed from Microsoft or Xbox to the developer
Mm-hmm.
and saying, we're wanting to have your game on our service. We are going to pay you this amount of money, and this is the expectation. But it's a little bit more than that. And the Christopher Drain drama kind of brought up a lot of this, right?
Yes.
There is an assumption of lost premium sales revenue, and there is a lost microtransaction and upsell revenue that is assumed with that bag of money from Xbox. Because, and ChatGPT did a really good job of showing actual, articles and data points of where this shows up.
Yep.
You know, if you're going to sell 1 million units at $60, that's part of this equation. And there is a percentage of users that spend money on microtransactions and whatever, and that's where they get the $5 million from. So
Hmm.
it's like there are people within Xbox and within the game development studios that know what these numbers are. And this, hypothetical $30 million infusion, it's not just some random number. People go in and determine what amount of money is appropriate to put a game onto Game Pass.
I see.
And and for the astute people looking at these numbers, this is not a very good number for this type of game. It is not actually beneficial for the studio. Um, but we'll get to more game examples in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So important to keep in mind going forward. This is all pre-launch of the game. Game Pass has already delivered the money. The studio has already assumed the cost or the infusion of money, and it's able to, do that as it wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see that in manifestation in future games. But it's important to note, without the Game Pass infusion or offset, this hypothetical AAA game would be $188 million. And with the Game Pass infusion, it'd be $158 million.
Effectively, usually, and this model. Okay, first I was looking, I was like, okay, 120 million, but that was just for the core game development. But the total speaks of a realistic picture. That $200 million sweet spot, which is 188. That makes okay. That makes sense now.
Yeah, and again, this is a template. This isn't
Yep.
specific. But again, we're going to get into the game examples because as much as this sounds good, and if you're into budgeting and stuff, this kind of makes sense. 80% of your budget's going towards development costs. You're spending roughly 13% for marketing, and
Mm-hmm.
7% is kind of your, general day-to-day operations for your development studio for that game. These numbers are reasonable. Nothing seems too outlandish. Those percentages can go up or down, But for going forward, the big thing here is just the overall budget.
Got it.
Anyways, okay, so what I did was I asked ChatGPT for some baseline numbers for various different games that have come out that have publicly known sales numbers, publicly known development costs, and I wanted to kind of figure out what it costs to produce the game per copy and how much profit is coming from the game itself. So, Horizon Forbidden West, popular PlayStation game, is allegedly costed about 130 million to produce and allegedly made 8.4 million in copies sold. Again, I don't want to get into the minutia of these were PlayStation 4 copies, these were PlayStation 5 remasters, these were PC copies sold. That gets into the weeds really quick, and I just want to focus on the broader picture here, right?
And the 8.4 million copies, I just wanted to ask, will be a timeline, right? Because that franchise has sold way more as
Yeah,
of
I think
now.
Yeah, I think this might have been in 2021
Okay.
data numbers. This
Okay.
is what ChatGPT showed. So, again, I don't want to get too into the specifics of it and use it more as of a like a case study example point,
Okay,
right?
good, good. I wanted us to highlight that. That way it wasn't like, oh, okay, got it.
Yep. So from the developers' perspective, they used 130 million of their money that they received from their overlords. I believe that would just be PlayStation funding them. I don't think that the development studio themselves forked over the money, but in their budget sheet, they got 130 million, and based on how many copies they sold, they basically think of it as it costs $15 per game
Mm-hmm.
sold to make this game. That data point isn't important for that specific game, but as we look at more samples, it'll become more important.
Okay.
From the 500 or the 8.4 million sold, they were able to make $504 million in total revenue. Again,
Wow.
this isn't taking platform sale costs. This isn't taking the 70-30% split into account,
Okay.
because that's just going to get into the weeds. And again, I want us to focus on the overall accounting of what would it potentially look like.
Got it.
And this is basically just this title or the amount of copies sold times the price. I believe it launched at $60. Remakes, sales, all that other stuff. I don't want to get into that because it's not useful for this conversation. So then we just take the total revenue minus the total dev costs, and we have a total gross profit of $374 million, which is pretty dang good. That comes out to be about $44.50 per copy sold is just pure is gross profit.
Got it.
That's a pretty big split between 15% or $15 and $44.
I
But
see.
what's crazy is this is just one game. So I went ahead and did the same thing for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Spider-Man 2018. I believe this is just the PlayStation 4 version. I don't think this includes remakes
PC or
and stuff.
anything. Yeah. The PlayStation 4 version was the one that really did it went nuts. Yes.
Yep. And then Last of Us Part 2. And what you'll notice here is Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Spider-Man are significantly less per copy to develop for because their dev costs were, a little bit higher than Forbidden West, but also a little less than Forbidden West. Sold similar amount of copies, made similar amounts of money, but that gross profit is huge because they sold a whole bunch of copies.
Yep.
And ultimately, their profit per copy sold is, around $55,
I
which is
see.
awesome. And then Last of Us Part 2, it's a little bit less expensive per copy. And again, this is, I believe, just the PlayStation 4 release, not any of the other remasters and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It was less expensive to develop for based on Forbidden West, but it ultimately didn't make as much money, which I thought was really interesting. with their gross profit and a profit per copy being about $50. So, at least to me, this all seems pretty reasonable. Why would you make a game if your profit's only going to be $20 per copy, only going to be, $10 per copy, right?
I see.
So, do you have any questions about this? Because we're about to throw Game Pass into the mix.
So far, I guess I wouldn't say necessarily. Well, yeah. So The Last of Us Part Two is an interesting case study. Do you think that's the reason because its development cost was probably lower compared to its yield in terms of profit per copy? Do you think that's one of the reasons they continue to remaster the franchise and put it out there in different forms?
We'll get to that specific answer in a little bit, but
Okay.
I think the main thing why the dev cost was a lot less is because it was an improvement on Last of Us Part One. So Last of Us
Uh.
Part One probably cost more to develop, took a little bit longer to create,
Mm-hmm.
and that made it not as profitable. Maybe again, I don't have the data, can't speak too much to it. Um, but since they already had a framework in place, they probably didn't spend as much money towards the development cost.
Okay.
And what would be interesting if anyone wants to find the data for it, what does Forza Horizon Forbidden or
Horizon Forbidden West. Wrong. Wrong.
well that yep, wrong game, sorry, I'm not a PlayStation guy. So Zero Dawn was the first one, so I'd be interested in seeing the Zero Dawn's development costs and stuff.
Okay.
So with all that in mind, I want to throw in everyone's favorite game to crap on when it comes to Xbox, and that's Starfield. I'm not going to,
Ooh.
yeah, I'm not going to show the future lines because I want to take this step by step in the entire argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's rumors that Starfield allegedly cost $200 million to develop, and according to some of the estimates from copies sold on Steam, they only sold 3.1 million copies. So total revenue, this was times 70 for you know, the box number.
Mm-hmm.
It cost them nearly $65 per copy to develop the game with only $5.50 in profit uh, per copy.
Wow.
So see what I mean by how these other games make a whole bunch more sense to release,
Mm-hmm.
and why Starfield, if we're only focusing on Steam PC sales, doesn't make sense to develop. That's bad.
Oh yeah. That's. Oof.
Yeah, and since the dev, and we'll get to why I think dev costs were so high here in a bit, but this is just like the baseline for Starfield. So now I want to introduce Game Pass. So I went ahead and removed the development totals and stuff, and I created, or I estimated how much stimulus is required from Game Pass to make Starfield a profitable enterprise with the infusion in place. In order to do that, this is all alleged. This is not any insider information. Do not take this as the gospel. Please don't take me out of context here, guys. I'm thinking Xbox would have had to stimulate the development costs by $138 million. That is like the entire Assassin's Creed Valhalla development budget.
Hmm.
Xbox had to fork over that much money in order for the development cost per copy by Bethesda to be within striking distance of these other games,
Mm-hmm.
and the profit per game sold just on sales alone, Steam sales alone, to be in line with other games. And you might be saying, or before I go on, what strikes you here, VG?
I'm looking at that revenue segment. That's what. That's where my eyes are tuned to right now.
Yeah, $138 million is a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's factor that into Game Pass. So I don't even think it's alleged. I think the developers said there were 15 million gamers playing Starfield, right?
I remember around 11. I remember they did one big post. 11 million players had played Starfield. That
Yeah.
number I remember very vividly. Did they go up to
Yeah.
15?
I think eventually it got to 15 million.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure you could Google that
Let me look it up
to
real
find
quick.
out.
That's not
Sure.
gonna take me any time. Let me see real quick. 11 million players played Starfield, and then I'll do one for 15 million players, just so I can get that. Oh, there it is. You are right. Starfield. This is the Starfield subreddit that says there is an image that says thanks to 10 million players. And there is a subreddit, a Starfield subreddit, that says that Starfield hit 15 million players with an IGN article that said it hit 15 million players as the patch added new achievement-friendly creations and vehicles and such. So the patch brought in a whole ton of people into the ecosystem. Okay, cool.
Okay. So again, this isn't to say anything's definitively proven here, but for the sake of our template here, we're kind of assuming that the total amount of copies sold plus the total amount of Game Pass users would equate to 15 million. And what I find really interesting here is going through some of the financials for Game Pass themselves. I heard there's a range that it costs per user between $5 and $7 for the service from Game Pass's side, and that there's a 40 to 60% margin for each user for the service. And what's funny is when I pipe these numbers in, I get those exact same figures out. So gross revenue per user on average is about $12 per Game Pass user,
Yep.
and 7 plus 5 is 12. So this is very reasonable, a reasonable assumption. So the big thing here is with Game Pass, the game only made $155 million, which isn't a lot of money compared to some of these other games. And Microsoft, through that 1 month of subscriptions, or yeah, I guess it would be 1 month of subscriptions, right? $12 per user. Microsoft made $57.5 million out of it.
Huh.
So ironically, in total, they probably made $12 million across both companies. But Starfield ultimately didn't make as much as they probably wanted to, right? So let's take into account some of these figures if we don't have Game Pass and we only focus on just pure sales, right? So I went ahead and used that same 15 million copies being sold, but since they're not getting a Game Pass infusion, the development cost is $200 million.
Got it.
So overall, the price per copy makes about 13 bucks per copy, which is within the range of what we saw before. That revenue is really, really, really high of $1 billion, right?
Billion
And the gross,
55.
yeah, and the gross profit is huge of $850 million, and the profit per title is 56, which is above any of these other games, even above Spider-Man. But my contention here is, would Starfield have sold 15 million copies? Because we hear a lot of people online saying, oh, if it wasn't 15 million copies sold, what was really sold, right? This is like the best case scenario. If every single user purchased the game, this is the maximum amount of money they could have generated, right? So
And that
now
would
I
mean they bought
wanted,
it full price as well too, or something like that.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
This is, yep, times
Times
70.
70, yeah.
Yep. So this is like, if all of the fanboys said is true, this would be this number, right? But we got to remember, Game Pass only gave $138 million. If you take that into account, That's only like Xbox bought 2 million copies and subsidized that much amount of sales. That's what this new row is. It's the 3.1 million sold on Steam plus the revenue that was assumed from the Xbox Infusion.
That's
Because
the loss premium sales.
exactly, the
Okay,
estimated loss of revenue based on the amount of units times the cost of the game.
got it.
So that's what I forget. Oh, we don't want to get to that just yet. So that's where this 5.1 million copies comes from. Again, that's a pretty decent amount,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also comparing this against games that cost $70 million less to create. So if the developer was to assume all of the development costs and all of the risk, they're looking at almost more than twice the amount of development cost per copy, and they're also assuming so much less profit per copy.
Huh.
But let's look at these two figures. If they only were to sell 5,100,000 copies versus the Game Pass where they only sold 3.1 million, the gross profit delta there is $2 million.
Yes.
So Game Pass is profitable just like if they were to sell the same amount of copies assumed with the Game Pass infusion.
Wow.
This is the break even point and why Game Pass is actually a decent proposition for some games.
Hmm. I see. So, and somebody might ask, does this mean that or I mean, the games that are already in development are already in development, right? When they acquired Bethesda, uh, games that they probably like or they see a lot of prospects, in terms of their individual sales will probably still go through. But can somebody say, well, now are they going to start curating games that they see the data that they do well for Game Pass? As time goes on, is this going to be something that shapes the industry into a pigeonhole of some sort?
Possibly. I think it really boils down to the developer wanting to assume risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this $200 million is probably, this is an assumption on my part, is extremely high based on the amount of investment from a third party, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because all of these other games, Last of Us Part 2, for Horizon Forbidden West, top tier AAA games, costing nearly half as much to develop. I think with Starfield, they just had a lot of extra money and they just spent a lot of extra money. That's, of course, my opinion.
I see.
So it's like Starfield could have cost less. And then, like, let's say, we'll put it here 130 million. Sorry if the numbers are, I'm missing some zeros. But if Starfield only, cost 130 million to produce,
Mm-hmm.
you know, this game looks much better. And the gross profit without uh, Game Pass included is almost what, 75 million
Mm-hmm.
more? That's a huge chunk of change
Huh.
just by making their dev costs smaller.
So,
But that's not reality.
okay. I mean, there's just so many presumptions that can be made here too, and a lot of this is probably lining up with what we're seeing now. Xbox hasn't been too explicit in talking about its development costs personally. It has talked about the rising cost of games from Phil Spencer, but I do remember that the PlayStation executives did mention operational excellence and also Hiroki Totoki talking about financial discipline. These are very key words that, if I mean, and these numbers that we have, they're based on, publicly available data and just creating a model and a template. But now I see the numbers backing up what it is that they're saying.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
definitely from a developer's perspective, there is a reason to take that Game Pass bag of cash. But let's go ahead and scroll down. I also did an example here with Horizon Forbidden West with Game Pass
Mm-hmm.
and also without Game Pass. So I assumed Forbidden West developers said, I want Microsoft to pay for half of my game. So that's the $65 million worth of infusion coming into the game, which reduces their dev costs by half.
Mm-hmm.
And that cut their cost per copy in half. And it also increased their profit per copy by $8 per copy.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, they sold this many copies, 8.4 million already. So this would be an example of like Game Pass going to them and saying, "Hey, we'd love to have your service, right?"
Mm-hmm.
So Game Pass gives this bag of cash. It allows them to earn a little bit of extra profit. I say a little bit extra profit. That's 439 million versus 374 million.
That's a good amount.
Yeah, and that's just straight cash on top, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not too much additional work. I doubt it cost them 65 million, or it would cost them 65 million to port that game to Xbox. So that number to the developer is just super high profit margin. But then Xbox, by giving 65 million uh, for their infusion, I would estimate that that would be close to 5.4 million gamers that would be able to play the game,
Mm-hmm.
and that would make Xbox $27 million on top of it.
Wow.
So this would be the instance where a already successful game gets added to Game Pass, and this would be the best case for the developer. But the worst case for the developer would be an instance like Starfield, where the Game Pass risk over no, what? How should I say this? Game Pass didn't give enough money, and they artificially limited the amount of sales that they were going to get. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they underguessed how popular the game would be. Maybe, for instance, like Expedition 33.
I see. So okay, yeah, okay. So Expedition 33 being the outlier in this case, in a sense.
Yeah, depending on, again, speculation, if Expedition 33 only got 20 million, uh, 20 million for their dev costs, and Xbox said, "Oh, we're going to subsidize you 1 million in total, game sales." You know,
Mm.
the game was massively popular, so it's like, what would that studio have gotten had they not gotten the Xbox subsidy, right?
Yeah, and here's the truth about this though. We're looking at this in terms of numbers, but there's also the conversation of the exposure that Xbox gave that particular studio. When they listed a game as part of their lineup at the Xbox showcase and all of that, that already beats a lot of monetary proposition in terms of, say, okay, let's say they already had a marketing budget, right? They agreed to get in there with Game Pass, and there was a lot of excitement, and Xbox showed the game, and now a lot of people had seen the game. Had they
Yeah,
gone with their own marketing and their own sales, I mean, who knows how that would have resonated, you know?
yep. And as a smaller studio, there was a lot of risk to make the game already.
Mm-hmm.
So by accepting the big bag of cash, that helped reduce their amount of risk, and they, fortunately enough, were able to sell so many extra copies on top of Game Pass, which would be more of similar to this Horizon Forbidden West scenario, where their sales are already really good.
Mm.
Microsoft gave them a chunk of money, so that chunk of money is just on top. So
That's
the problem
crazy.
would be like if the sales for the game, sorry if this is all on the fly now, if they only sold 2.4 million copies, that profit margin going from 374 million down to 79 million,
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge hit to the developer. But you got to remember, they didn't have to take half of their development cost as risk.
I think that's what really makes this whole conversation quite interesting, because the way, Game Pass has been looked at, it makes it seem like, okay, the service is going to be, the service is going to destroy the gaming industry. And I always ask, you know, in what way would a service like this destroy the industry? Not saying that they're not, the biggest problem with Game Pass is the third party games, they cycle through the service. And so you might be in the middle of playing a game based on, the fact that you don't have as much time, and then the game leaves the service. And so now, for convenience, you might be in a position where you spend more money to buy the game because the game might not be on sale, or whatever it is. That's the big challenge with Game Pass at the end of the day. When I'm playing a game on Game Pass, the first question I ask myself is, when is this game going to actually leave? And then I'm going to basically be in a position where I might have to buy it on this platform if it's not on sale. And even if it's on sale on Steam, I may not want to go ahead and, restart the game and restart my progress on Steam, because that's a lot of time I've already invested. So that right there is the biggest problem for the gamer in terms of that. However, with the Xbox titles, that's not even a problem. They're always going to be there.
I do want to kind of highlight here and kind of conclude my point here of why Game Pass can be profitable for both Xbox and the developer.
Mm-hmm.
And for Xbox, even when they give $138 million to a studio to subsidize the development costs, they made $57 million out of that deal alone. And it's a continued by-month basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this subsidizing this game is already built into their yearly budget. So as Game Pass grows and as they get additional subscribers and all that, it's really just going to keep scaling, and they're going to have more money to buy even more, or to subsidize additional games. So for Game Pass's side, they can give out huge bags of cash and still come out on top with only providing those bags of cash. So that instantly makes Game Pass for Xbox instantly profitable. Now, for the developer, it not only helps reduce the risk that the developer is going to see, but it also helps give them a baseline sales expectation that they can then go and surpass by becoming multi-platform and selling on PlayStation. Because had Starfield released on PlayStation 5, as it's kind of currently rumored, let's assume they sell 3 million copies. They instantly almost outpace the gross profit for Forbidden West by selling 2 million less copies. Hell, let's go ahead and make it 8 million copies.
Oh.
125 million more than what Forbidden West made. Their development cost is half of what Horizon Forbidden West is, and their margin per copy is probably close to 70%.
Wow. Oh my. So okay. I've always suspected this, but looking at these individual numbers based on the assumptions and based on the possibilities, I can see why it's much more imperative now for developers to continue to market their game even after putting it on Game Pass.
Yep.
It's just I just saw a comment from one of my audience members that Cyberpunk 2077 is going to PlayStation Plus Extra.
Yep.
So what this means now is CD Projekt Red is basically getting a bag, but the bag is now post launch by 5 years.
Yep.
And so the Game Pass model is not inherently different. The only impact is the time where the bag is received by the developer, pre-launch or post-launch. And the platform holder, PlayStation and Xbox, they just want to leverage that to get eyes into their subscription service and keep their subscribers to have the recurring subscription that's going to basically net them more money.
Yep, and that's I forgot what I was going to say, but for Cyberpunk, the game came out in what, 2020,
Mm-hmm.
2021.
Mm-hmm.
Getting Oh, no, no, now I remember what I was going to say. That bag of cash is basically PlayStation buying a certain amount of copies
Copies.
and allowing their subscribers to access those copies.
Pretty much. I've made that same analogy before. In fact, I did an AI model yesterday using Copilot, ChatGPT, and I threw DeepSeek into it as well. And what was funny is they all put up a conservative model as to Game Pass's margin at the end, and the most conservative model was showing that Game Pass was at a 16% profit margin at 35 million subscribers. And so I, basically threw in a prompt for 40, 50, and 60 million Game Pass subscribers. And now that we know that the last official number was 35, February of last year, and there's somewhat of a trend of about 1 million to 2 million subscribers added every year. If Game Pass hits about 40 million subscribers, the most conservative margin is about 28 to close to 40% in terms of its possible, margin. In terms of its profits, ChatGPT was doing close to 50%, 40, 46 or so percent in terms of what they're going to be profiting at the end of the day. So they shot for 100 million subscribers, publicly available statements, right? But even at a third of their goal, they're already profitable. Actually, before they got to a third of their goal, around there, I think it was in 2022, Phil Spencer came out and said that Game Pass was finally profitable or something along the lines of that. So if they hit 40% of this 100 million subscriber target, they're going to be pushing a 50% margin on the subscription service. That's I don't know what business runs on 50% profit margin.
Yeah, I did some searches on that, and the the general average of a good gross margin is like between 30 and 40%. So
Wow.
being in the 40 to 60% range is considered good. And
Wow.
this business proposition, Game Pass is just like a component of their entire portfolio. And this is basically just them coming up with contractual agreements and handing out bags of cash in order to get access to the content, right?
Mhm.
So this is a very lucrative thing for Xbox because they're not the ones creating Starfield. Their developers are.
Hmm.
So that's why Game Pass itself is for Xbox is always going to be profitable because they're just trying to get the content out.
I see. And when it comes to the other layer, which is also the sales of the games, think about post-launch sales. I've been playing Starfield. I played Starfield. I think I played a few hours on Xbox. Never got to finish it, but it's been going on sale on Steam. But I'm like, I'm not going back to play it again. So when I eventually choose that I want to buy the game, that's more of an an income for them, and they build their revenue streams by the game already having established what I think is like a base and a home on Xbox itself perpetually. You know what I mean? Gamers have
Yeah.
save files on these games, right? Whether it's Xbox via PC, Xbox via console. And so I don't think the converse. I think what the conversation has been missing is the layers of the subscription business, and especially the way Xbox has structured its subscription compared to the others that they like to compare it with. For instance, if I look at and I'm gonna be dropping the names of the other subscription service. Like if you look at Disney and you look at Netflix, you cannot buy content on those platforms. In fact, the proposition is that you can't. I don't know. I've never seen a buy button for movies or TV shows on Netflix.
Yeah, the closest you would get was to get their actual DVDs in the mail, and they
Mm-hmm.
quickly got rid of that.
Mm-hmm. But on Xbox, it's predicated on the fact that sales is at the core and sales is at the bottom. So If, say, over the lifetime, Starfield sells another 1, 2, 3, 4 million copies, and we plot those copies at a reduced cost of $30, maybe 50% after sales and averages, that continues to increase that gross profit margin of the game over time. I don't understand how nobody saw this when they were all talking about Game Pass's proposition. Could it be that maybe some people just don't use the service, or maybe don't know about it?
I have a feeling people just don't understand how the actual subscription business works. And as a user, you would think you would understand how it would work from your perspective. Because, like you said, why would I buy a full priced game when I have Game Pass and eventually it's going to go on sale on the Xbox store? So it's like I could play it on Game Pass for however many months on top of all those other games and then buy the game on sale. So, but that's all speculation beyond what I wanted to show today. So,
That's cool. That's cool. Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming on the channel and, like, talking about this and putting some other numbers to it, which we have, access to in terms of publicly available data, and just running some, some models and such. This has been really insightful because the conversation has almost forgotten that there are numbers attached to it. And again, another challenge too is the fact that there's, a little bit of secrecy in terms of, the industry. But over time, some stuff comes out, and that gives us the, it gives us a good idea on what kind of picture that we can paint. So, I appreciate you coming on the, on the channel to talk about this, and I hope you guys probably, glean something from this. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. If this is what you've always suspected, also let me know. If you have any models as well, link them to me on Twitter. Like I said at the beginning of this, some of you build spreadsheets for me on different, subjects and cost of games and the value proposition and such. Numbers breakdown, shout out to you, and a host of others as well too, who've been, providing a lot of data points, for this whole conversation. So thanks once again, and hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Appreciate y'all so much. Peace out.